On our anniversary dinner, my husband's mother slid a receipt across the table and sneered, "That dress you love?" He bought it with my credit card. I glared at him, and he stammered, "It was just a temporary thing." I leaned in calmly, "So is this marriage? Let me make it easier for you. I'm keeping the dress, and you're keeping her." I think it started with a silence. Not the loud kind, the angry, shouting type that feels like a door slamming in your face. No, this was the quieter kind. The kind that creeps in slowly, like fog around your ankles, and you don't realize you're standing in the middle of it until you're soaked and shivering. I'm Monica, and this isn't a story I ever thought I'd tell. Maybe it's because when something awful happens in a marriage, especially after years of believing things are fine, there's a shame to admitting it. Like you missed something. Like you should have known. We lived in San Antonio, not too far from the Pearl District, in a Spanish-style house with a red tile roof and windows that rattled when the wind picked up. I'd picked that house. Spent weeks driving around with a realtor, picturing how I'd paint the walls, where I'd place the reading chair, the herb garden I'd plant near the kitchen window. It wasn't big, but it had character. That's what I loved. Character. Kent. Well, Kent liked flash. Open spaces, big showy lights, things that made an impression. We compromised on that house after he saw the arched doorways and the backyard patio he could use to entertain clients. Compromise, that was the theme of our marriage. Or so I thought. That April morning, the day of our anniversary, I remember watching the sunlight spill across the floorboards while I sipped coffee. I looked down at my chipped nail polish, made a mental note to touch it up before dinner. I wasn't excited about it. Not really. But I'd bought this emerald green silk dress on a whim a few weeks earlier, and maybe I was curious to see if it still had the power to light something between us. Kent had made the reservation, something he hadn't done in years without me asking. La Patisserie. Fancy, small, elegant. Definitely not his usual steakhouse vibe. I'd found it unusual, but I told myself maybe it was an olive branch. We didn't speak much during the day. He texted, "Dinner's at 7. Don't be late," and that was it. I took my time getting ready. Showered slowly. Took longer than usual with my hair. Put on the dress and stared at myself in the mirror. For a moment, I felt, almost like I used to. Before the exhaustion, before the doubts. The dress hugged all the right places, and for once, I felt visible again. The restaurant was dimly lit with little candles on every table, walls painted in soft gold and maroon tones, the kind of place that whispered luxury rather than screamed it. I spotted Kent immediately. He was already seated, looking at his phone, his brow furrowed like always. And sitting next to him was Loretta. My stomach sank, hard and sudden. I paused at the entrance, long enough for the hostess to ask, "Ma'am, would you like to follow me to the table?" I walked over slowly, my heels tapping against the tile floor, each step adding weight to my chest. "Loretta," I said, trying to keep my voice even as I slid into the seat opposite them. She gave me a thin smile. "You look dramatic. That color. It's very bold." Kent cleared his throat, not meeting my eyes. "Mom didn't want to eat alone tonight," he muttered. "She's not a widow," I replied, staring at him, but he was already reaching for his wine. The waiter came. We ordered. I barely tasted my food. Loretta kept the conversation going with stories I didn't care about, some charity function, her neighbor's new poodle, the rising cost of property taxes in her gated community. I nodded, smiled when I had to, and sipped my wine to keep from saying something sharp. Then, just as the waiter brought out dessert, Loretta reached into her handbag. She pulled out a folded piece of paper, small, rectangular, the kind you don't forget once you see it, and laid it neatly in front of me. I didn't move. I just stared at it. "That dress you love so much," she said, her voice sweet and cold at the same time. He bought it with my credit card. It was silent for a beat. Just the sound of silverware clinking, someone coughing 2 tables away, the faint hum of the restaurant's background music. I looked at Kent. His face said everything before his mouth opened. "Monica, it was just a temporary thing," he said too quickly, his hands lifting like he could smooth the air between us. I picked up the receipt. Scanned the line. Neiman Marcus. $620. Silk evening gown. I swallowed. Not because of the number, but because of the confirmation. That small, stupid paper carried more truth than anything Kent had said to me in months. I folded it back, slowly, deliberately, and looked at him. "So is this marriage?" I said, calm and quiet. He blinked, taken off guard, like he hadn't expected me to actually respond. "I'm keeping the dress," I added. "And you're keeping her." I stood, placed the receipt on the table like it was a tip, and walked out without looking back. The thing no one tells you is that the real hurt comes after. In the quiet of your car when your hands are shaking too much to drive. When you get home and the lights are off and you realize you have no one to tell what just happened because the person who would have been your first call was the person. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat on the edge of the bathtub, staring at my reflection in the mirror. Makeup still perfect. Hair still pinned. Dress still flawless. Like nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something huge. Something final. The next day, I stayed in bed. Didn't answer calls. Didn't check emails. The silence returned, but this time it was different. Heavier. Lonely. 3 days later, he texted, "We need to talk." I can explain everything, but there's a difference between an explanation and an excuse. I didn't reply. I called a lawyer instead. Kent didn't come home that night. Or the next. But I wasn't surprised. He'd always been a runner. Not physically, he hated exercise, but emotionally. When things got uncomfortable, he'd disappear into work, fake emergencies, or spend hours scrolling on his phone pretending to be busy. I think he believed if he ignored something long enough, it would either go away or magically fix itself. But this wasn't going away. When I called Leah Sandoval, the attorney my friend Raina had recommended, I expected to feel fear. Or grief. Or at least some hesitation. But what I felt was steady. Like a light had finally switched on in a room I'd been sitting in the dark in for years. Leah was direct. Sharp. The kind of woman who didn't waste time or sugarcoat. I liked her immediately. She asked, "Do you want to wait and see if this is something he's willing to work through, or are you ready to file?" I hesitated for maybe half a second. "I'm ready." We met the next day in her office, 5th floor of a building downtown with those big windows that overlook the Riverwalk. She laid it all out. Assets, debt, alimony, what I could expect, what he might try. I told her everything. The dress, the receipt, Loretta, the silence that had been growing for over a year. She nodded once, scribbled a few notes, and said, "He's going to fight this, Monica." Men like him usually do. Not because they love you, but because they hate losing control. And she was right. 2 days later, Kent finally showed up at the house. It was early evening. I was in the kitchen, barefoot, heating up leftover chicken stew when I heard the front door unlock. The click of it sent a cold rush down my spine. He walked in like he still lived there, like nothing had changed. I didn't turn around. "I thought we could talk," he said. I stood in silence for a moment before turning down the heat on the stove. When I finally turned to face him, I took him in fully, his pressed shirt, his fake calm expression. The small twitch in his left eye he always got when he was lying. "You want to talk?" I asked. He nodded. "Look, what happened at dinner, it wasn't supposed to come out like that. My mom, your mom." I cut him off. She slid a receipt across the table like she was delivering a death sentence. "You sat there and let her." He opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time, I saw him hesitate. Really hesitate. It was like watching a magician fumble his cards mid-trick. "I didn't want to upset you. You used her card to buy me that dress," I said, voice flat. "Why?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "Things have been tight. I had a bad month at work, commissions fell through. It was just a temporary thing. I meant to pay her back." "How many other things have been temporary?" That's when his face changed. He went from guilty to defensive in a heartbeat. "This is getting blown out of proportion," he said, stepping closer. "It was a charge on a card. That's all. You're acting like I Mr. Dared someone." I didn't flinch. "You didn't Mr. Dare anyone, Kent. You just Mr. Dared my trust." The days after that were a blur of paperwork, awkward phone calls, and discoveries I hadn't braced myself for. Leah asked me to get access to our shared accounts. Anything with both your names, anything in your name only, anything that seems off. I started digging. What I found wasn't just financial instability, it was rot. Deep, festering rot beneath the shiny surface Kent had kept so carefully polished. He had 3 credit cards I didn't know about. One of them was maxed out. Another had regular charges to a luxury spa in Austin. Then there were hotel stays, out-of-town weekends he told me were corporate retreats. I cross-referenced the dates with his calendar. They didn't match. One day, while printing out more statements, I found something that stopped me cold. A charge at Sweet Beginnings, a boutique maternity and baby store on Broadway Street. At first, I thought maybe Loretta had asked him to pick up a gift. She was always going to baby showers. But no, this was recent. And expensive. And personal. A $300 charge for a prenatal pillow, a bassinet, and a gold-plated baby bracelet. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to believe it. But you can only deny reality for so long before it grabs you by the face and forces you to look. I confronted him in a lawyer's conference room. He had brought his own attorney by then, a younger guy, slick hair, too confident. We sat across from each other, papers between us like a wall. Leah did most of the talking. But at one point I leaned forward, looked Kent in the eye, and asked, "Who's she?" He blinked. "What are you talking about?" "The one you bought the baby gifts for." His face went blank. Not guilty. Not apologetic. Just empty. Then came the pause. That single moment told me everything. "Her name's Mariel," he finally said, barely above a whisper. "She works at my office." It's complicated. "Is she pregnant?" Another pause. "Yes." And just like that, I felt something in me unhook. Not break. Not shatter. Just release. A quiet letting go of something that had already died, even if I hadn't known it. It was Raina who came over that night and sat on the couch with me in silence. I didn't cry. I didn't want to. I wanted clarity. And I was getting it, piece by piece, even if it hurt. "Do you remember," I said to her, when he told me I was overreacting for wanting a weekend alone? She nodded. He said people who need me time are just avoiding their partners. Raina didn't say anything, but I saw it in her eyes. She had seen the cracks before I did. Later that week, I ran into Mariel. Not on purpose. Not planned. It was at a coffee shop not far from my house. I had just come out of a meeting with a new client and wanted something strong and sweet to keep my mind steady. She was standing in line, one hand on her stomach, the other holding a phone. She looked young. Too young for all of this. Tired. Anxious. She turned and saw me. Recognition flashed across her face, followed by embarrassment. She started. I raised a hand. "Don't. It's done." She looked like she might cry. "He said you were cold. That you didn't love him anymore." I exhaled slow. Of course he did. I haven't finished untangling the mess. The divorce is still dragging through the system. Loretta, from what I hear, is now criticizing Mariel for not carrying herself like a proper woman. Kent's real estate deals are tanking. Turns out he leaned heavily on image, and when that cracked, so did his business. But I'm okay. I wake up now and make coffee in silence that feels peaceful, not punishing. I play jazz while I clean. I've painted 2 rooms in the house. The one I'm keeping. My house now. I'm building again. And I'm not done yet. The weeks that followed turned into something strange. Not grief exactly, but a kind of emotional molting. Like I was shedding parts of myself I hadn't realized were tied to Kent. My routines were different. The mornings especially. He used to take forever in the bathroom, hogging the mirror, adjusting his tie 3 times, spraying that awful cologne like it was part of his DNA. Now, the house felt lighter. I could hear birds outside again. Funny how peace is sometimes just the absence of certain noises. I saw less of people at first. Partly because I was embarrassed and partly because I didn't know what to say. Everyone had an opinion. Some friends were shocked. Others not surprised at all. One even said, "Well, at least he left you for someone younger." That's what they do. That one stung. Not because of the age part, but because of how casually it was said, like I was supposed to just swallow it and move on. What people couldn't see, was how Kent had been rewriting our marriage while I was still living in it. He'd been revising history in real time, changing the narrative for himself, for Mariel, for anyone who asked. Suddenly, I'd become the distant one. The cold one. The woman who didn't support him emotionally. I started therapy. Just once a week, with a woman named Lonnie who had kind eyes and asked good questions. She didn't tell me what I wanted to hear. She asked me what I believed. What I wanted. Questions I hadn't asked myself in years. One day, she asked, "When did you stop trusting your instincts?" I didn't have an answer right away, but it haunted me for days, because the truth was, I had felt it. The disconnect. The lies. The way Kent's eyes shifted when I asked about his day. The forgotten dates. The lack of intimacy, not just physical, but in conversation, in laughter, in the tiny threads that hold 2 people together. I just didn't want to face it. A few weeks later, I got an email. From Loretta. It was a short note. Just 2 lines. "You may think you've won something here, but you've made this family harder to hold together. I hope your pride was worth it." I stared at the screen, rereading it over and over. I didn't reply. But later that night, I stood at the back window, staring out at the garden, and I whispered, "Your son is not my family anymore." My lawyer was building a solid case. Kent's financial irresponsibility. The affair. The hidden accounts. It all added up. But what none of it captured, what no judge could rule on, was the emotional debt. The years I'd spent being loyal to a man who'd quietly decided to leave long before he packed a bag. And then, just when I thought the surprises were over, another one arrived. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I had a standing grocery run on Tuesdays. I was unloading bags from my trunk when Raina pulled into my driveway, waving her phone at me with that look she gets when something is really wrong. "You need to see this," she said. She showed me a screenshot from a Facebook post. Mariel, smiling, wearing a diamond ring that looked eerily familiar. Caption: "When the man you love gives you everything you deserve. Can't wait to be Mrs. Hale." Mrs. Hale. My last name. Still legally mine. The name I'd taken because Kent said it would mean something to him. The name I was in the process of deciding whether or not to keep. I felt the burn rise in my chest. Not jealousy, not heartbreak, but something quieter. Disgust. Not just at him. At myself. Too. For how long I'd believed his promises. I turned to Raina. "They're getting married?" "Looks like it," she said carefully. "But it's not finalized yet." "The divorce. Legally, you're still his wife." The rage didn't come. Not in the loud way I expected. It came in cold waves. Steady. Focused. I called Leah. "Can we use this?" I asked. She didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." Around that time, I started to get more of Kent's mail by mistake. Notices from credit companies. One from a collection agency. I set them aside, unopened, stacking them on a corner table like a pile of old leaves I didn't want to touch. His life was unraveling, and he didn't even know how visible it had become. I stopped by the office building he used to rent downtown. Just to see. The suite was empty. Lights off. Sign gone. I later found out from an old colleague of his, Kent had defaulted on 2 lease payments. The company had quietly dissolved. It didn't surprise me. He was always better at appearances than actual work. One day, while walking through the Japanese tea garden, I saw a woman sketching on a bench. She looked peaceful. Alone but not lonely. I watched her for a minute and something inside me shifted. That used to be me. Or maybe a version of me I hadn't allowed room for in years. When I got home, I opened the closet and pulled out an old sketchbook I hadn't touched since before the wedding. It was dusty. Pages stiff from time. But the pencil in my hand still felt familiar. I started drawing again. Slowly. No goal. Just lines, shapes, shadows. And in that quiet act, I realized something. Kent had taken things from me. Time, energy, trust. But he hadn't taken me. I was still here. The court date was approaching. Leah was prepared. I was prepared. Kent, according to her, had finally hired a new lawyer. More aggressive, more expensive. A man trying to prove something, just like his client. There was talk of a settlement. Of mediation. I wasn't interested. Not yet. Because this wasn't just about money. It was about telling the truth. Out loud. On record. Not just for the court. For me. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not just the temperature, but the atmosphere. People whispered in corners, shuffled papers, tapped their pens. It wasn't the explosive showdown movies make it out to be. It was procedural, precise. But underneath it all, the tension buzzed. Kent sat across from me at the long table. Suit pressed, jaw tight, eyes flickering between his lawyer and me like he couldn't decide who he hated more in that moment. He hadn't looked me in the eye since our last confrontation. Not when I dropped off keys to the lake house. Not when I ran into him once in line at the bank. It was like if he avoided eye contact long enough, maybe I'd disappear from his version of the story altogether. Too bad the court doesn't run on fantasy. Leah was flawless. She laid out the facts like tiles, clean and deliberate. The financial discrepancies, the affair, supported by statements and photos, the prenatal purchases, the engagement announcement during a pending divorce, the hidden accounts when she introduced the screenshots of Mariel's Facebook posts. There was a murmur in the room. His lawyer tried to pivot. Blamed emotional stress. Claimed I'd been cold and inattentive. Accused me of emotional abandonment. Leah didn't even flinch. She simply asked the judge if a cold spouse justifies financial deceit, lies, and infidelity. She let the facts speak for themselves. And they did. We didn't get everything we asked for. That's not how court works. But we got enough. The judge granted me the house. Full rights. No buyout. I received a settlement large enough to cover the debts he'd hidden, plus damages for fraud. And most importantly, I got his name removed from my financial life. Every account, every investment, every policy. Gone. There was a moment, brief, when Kent looked like he might say something to me as we left the courtroom. But I didn't give him the space. I walked past him, chin lifted, heels steady, the same way I walked out of that restaurant the night it all fell apart. A few months passed. I painted the front door of the house blue. Something about it felt symbolic. Like the kind of decision you make when your life is finally yours again. I started teaching art classes twice a week at a community center downtown. Nothing big. Just pencil, charcoal, a little watercolor. But I loved it. I loved watching people, some older than me, rediscover the joy of creating something with their hands. One day, while browsing a gallery, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in a long time. Kyle. He used to work at the museum back when I volunteered there years ago. We got coffee, talked, laughed. It wasn't romantic. Not yet. Maybe never. But it felt easy. And then came the moment that I didn't expect, the one that brought everything full circle. Loretta called me. She left a voicemail. Her voice was clipped, brittle. She said Kent was struggling, that his real estate ventures had dried up, that he was having trouble finding clients, burned bridges and all. He's not the man I raised, she said. And I just wanted you to know. I may have been wrong about you. I didn't call her back. But what I did next, that's where the quiet revenge came in. A friend of mine, Dana, worked in private event planning. She mentioned that a high-end charity auction was looking for a keynote artist. Someone local. Someone who could speak about reinvention, creativity, new chapters. I said yes. The event was held at a luxury venue downtown, ironically, one Kent used to brag about trying to get listed as a client. I wore that same emerald green dress. The one Loretta tried to weaponize. The one Kent never paid for. I stood under the soft lights, shared a few words about rebuilding through art. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. Kent was there. I saw him at the back of the room, next to a client he was clearly trying to impress. When he saw me walk up to the podium, I saw the flicker in his eyes. Surprise. Confusion. A little shame. Afterward, a few people came to speak with me. Asked about commission work. Dana said my pieces would likely sell quickly. One woman even said, I don't know what you've been through, but there's strength in everything you create. I smiled. Not because I was proud. Not because I needed the praise. But because she was right. That night, I didn't go home thinking about Kent. I didn't wonder what would happen to him, or whether Mariel ever realized what kind of man she'd tied herself to. I went home, poured a glass of wine, turned on music, and pulled out my sketchbook. And I started something new. Not to replace the past. Just to remind myself that it never defined me to begin with.